Welcome to Close Your Eyes, Listen to Stories. Close your eyes, relax, and let me take you into the story. If you stand in your mind at the edge of the old Greek world, before maps were neat and before distances felt tame, the sea does not look like scenery. It looks alive. It heaves like the chest of a sleeping giant. It flashes silver, then dark iron, then a blue so deep it seems to remember the first morning of the world. In that breathing border between land and mystery, the Greeks felt the presence of Poseidon. He was not simply a god who happened to live near water. He was the force that made coastlines uncertain, ships hopeful, and human pride feel very small. His story begins among a family already full of dread. He was born to Rhea and Cronus, the Titan king who feared his own children because prophecy had curled itself around his house like smoke. One by one, Cronus swallowed each newborn child, hiding them inside himself as if time could be stopped by force. Poseidon, in the most familiar telling, was one of those lost children, folded into darkness until Zeus was grown and bold enough to challenge his father. When the swallowed children were brought back into the light, Poseidon emerged not as an infant, but as a power waiting to take shape. Yet Greek myth is fond of variations, and Poseidon carries one of them from Arcadia, inland and old. In that local tradition, Rhea tricks Cronus by giving him a foal to swallow while the child Poseidon is hidden among lambs. It is a strange image, gentle and rustic, and it hints at something important. Even before later poets linked him fully to horses, some memory had already joined Poseidon to the snorting energy of that animal, to mane and muscle and sudden motion. Myth rarely explains itself plainly. It leaves clues the way tides leave shells. After the long war between the younger gods and the Titans, the world had to be divided. But before that famous drawing of lots, Poseidon was already more ancient than many listeners realize. His name appears, or something very close to it, in Mycenaean Greek tablets written in Linear B, centuries before the age of Socrates, tragedy, or marble temples at their brightest. There, in the scratched bookkeeping of palace life, you can glimpse a god called Poseidon. That little echo matters. It means Poseidon was not a late poetic invention. He belonged to an older layer of Greek memory, perhaps so old that even classical Greeks inherited him like a coastline, present, powerful, and not fully explained. From the beginning, he ruled more than the open sea. He belonged to springs, to rivers that vanished underground, to caves where water dripped in slow mineral time, and to earthquakes that made the hard earth behave like waves. One of his most famous epithets, Enosikthon, means earth shaker. Another, Gyokos, means holder of the earth. These names tell you that he was not neatly boxed into one domain. He lived wherever the ground might move under your feet or the horizon might change without warning. This made him magnificent. It also made him hard to love in an easy way. Zeus might send lightning from above, but Poseidon was closer to daily risk. Fishermen, traders, colonists, and sailors entering unfamiliar bays all knew that a voyage depended on winds, currents, reefs, and luck. A city inland could admire Athena's reason or Apollo's order. A harbor city, smelling salt on the stone and hearing ropes groan against wooden piers, knew it must also reckon with Poseidon. He could carry you outward toward wealth, discovery, and song. He could also take the keel from beneath you in a single dark hour. So the Greeks imagined him in forms both regal and untamed. In Homer's poetry, he rides across the sea in a chariot drawn by bronze-hoofed horses, and the waters flatten beneath him in wonder. Sea creatures gather. The deep opens. In other images, he is bearded, broad-shouldered, crowned, holding the trident that became his sign because three prongs seemed to suit a god who could pierce sea, shore, and earth alike. His presence is never still. Even in sculpture, you feel movement waiting. And around him stretches the mythological world that made him necessary. Island kingdoms linked by dangerous water. Capes where sudden squalls turn a prayer urgent. Sacred groves where bulls were led in garlands. Caverns thought to descend into hidden waters below the known world. Poseidon belongs to all those places. He is the tremor in the rock, the salt left on skin, the booming heard in a cliff cave when surf rolls through. He is what turns geography into feeling. To enter his story, then, is to enter a world where the sea is not background. It is a will. It is a road and a threat. It is beauty with teeth. And in the heart of that world stands Poseidon, brother of Zeus and Hades, older than many temples, lord of waves and horses and broken ground, carrying in his myths the old Greek understanding that the most life-giving powers are often the least obedient. When the war against the Titans had been won, and the sky no longer rang with that first divine violence, the brothers cast lots for the great realms of existence. Zeus received the sky, Hades received the underworld, the misted kingdom below the roots of things. Poseidon received the sea. But Greek myth quietly adds an important detail. The earth itself and high Olympus remain common to all three. That is one reason Poseidon can never be reduced to a single blue frontier. He moves through the world rather than staying politely inside one element. The sea, in Greek imagination, was not empty water. It was a kingdom with roads, chambers, thresholds, and courts. Homer places Poseidon in shining halls beneath the waves, often associated with Aigai, a place that is itself part geography and part sacred imagination. The palace gleams with gold. Horses stamped there, though no mortal stable could hold them. The deep is not black chaos, but structured splendor, a royal house below the shifting skin of the world. It is a lovely contradiction. Poseidon rules what humans find unstable, yet he does so from a seat of immense permanence. His trident became the sign that gathered all his powers into one image. With it, poets say he could stir storms, split rock, and call forth springs. The weapon is simple enough that children can recognize it at a glance, yet its meaning is deeper than heraldry. A spear suits a warrior. A scepter suits a king. A trident, with its three teeth, looks like an implement made for entering difficult substance, for fishing depths, prying open hidden places, and striking where land and sea meet. In art, it gives Poseidon not elegance, but authority with edges. Then there are the horses. This is one of the most intriguing parts of his identity, because it feels surprising only if you imagine the sea as separate from speed. For the Greeks, waves could look like galloping manes, surf could pound like hooves, and the foam of breakers resemble breath. Poseidon Hippios, Poseidon of horses, was honored in places far from the shore. Some myths even credit him with the creation of the first horse. In one Arcadian tradition, he pursues Demeter while both take equine form, and from that strange and ancient story comes the wondrous horse Arion. It is one more sign that Poseidon's oldest nature ran through land as well as water. Because of this breadth, sailors were not his only petitioners. Charioteers, horse breeders, and cities anxious about earthquakes could also look toward him. As Poseidon asked for Leos, he might be asked for stability. As the earth shaker, he might be feared for the very opposite. Greek religion was comfortable with such paradox. A god who caused danger could also be the god best able to prevent it. You prayed not because divinity was simple, but because it was strong. His household beneath the water reflects the same rich ambiguity. Amphitrite becomes his queen, dignified and sea-born. Triton, their son, appears in later imagination with a conch shell and a body half human, half fish, a herald shaped like the sea's own mixed nature. Around them gather nereids, dolphins, seahorses, and older beings less tame and more ancient. Poseidon is never isolated. The realm around him ripples with lesser lives and spirits, each one suggesting that the sea has neighborhoods mortals only dimly sense. Even his monsters are not random. They are forms of abundance gone strange. In epic poetry, he travels with irresistible force. He does not always need a ship. He races in a chariot over the sea surface, and the waves part or smooth before him. The image tells you how Greeks thought divine motion differed from mortal effort. Human beings must negotiate with water. Poseidon commands it as a rider commands trained horses, except that his horses are themselves marine, their bronze hooves flashing through foam. It is a scene full of grandeur, but also of intimacy. The god knows his element the way a skilled hand knows reins. He is easy to picture in fury, and myth often remembers him that way. Yet there is another side in his symbols. Springs bursting from dry ground, safe harbors, the regular pulse of tides, and the promise that islands can still be connected by voyaging all belong to him as well. Without Poseidon, the Greek world would have been less a civilization and more a scatter of separate stones. The sea threatened, yes, but it also linked. It carried bronze, grain, stories, and strangers who would become allies or rivals. Poseidon ruled risk, but he also ruled connection. That is why his image remains so compelling. He is not a god of one clean mood. He is grandeur mixed with volatility, nourishment braided with danger, beauty that cannot promise kindness. When the Greeks imagined his golden halls under moving water, they were doing more than decorating a myth. They were giving form to a truth they felt in their bones, that what sustains life often lies in powers too vast to flatter human wishes. Some gods in myth seem content with their own glory. Poseidon is not one of them. He enters the affairs of cities, kings, and wandering heroes with the same force he brings to weather. His myths often turn on a question that feels larger than any single episode. Who truly deserves a place, a coast, a city's loyalty, or a safe passage home? One of his most famous rivalries is with Athena for the land that would become Athens. The contest is remembered in slightly different forms, but the heart of it remains steady. Each god offers a gift to the city. Poseidon strikes the Acropolis with his trident and produces either a salt spring or a horse, depending on the version. Athena offers the olive tree, patient, useful, and peaceable. King Cecrops, or the assembled citizens, choose Athena's gift as the wiser one. The story does more than explain a city name. It stages a deep contrast between two kinds of power, brilliance and endurance on one side, force and magnificence on the other. Poseidon's loss matters because he never becomes a harmless loser. In some versions, his anger floods the plain around Athens. In others, the salt spring remains on the Acropolis as a sign that he was not erased, only denied first place. Even in the city of Athena, Poseidon had shrines and honors. Greek religion rarely reduced divine rivalries to simple exclusion. A city might choose its patron, but it still had to live in a world that patron did not fully control. Another revealing episode joins Poseidon to Apollo in the service of the Trojan king, Laomedon, ordered, in one tradition, to labor for a mortal ruler. The two gods build the mighty walls of Troy. When the work is done, Laomedon refuses to pay them. It is a dangerous mistake, one that sounds almost like a folktale lesson. Never cheat a god, especially one who has just raised your defenses. Poseidon responds by sending a sea monster against the land. Heracles later enters the tale and kills the creature, but the insult remains lodged in myth. Poseidon does not forget a broken bargain. That same memory of insult flows into the Trojan War in more complicated ways. In the Iliad, Poseidon often favors the Greeks, not because they are morally pure, but because Troy's royal house stands in the shadow of earlier offenses. He moves through the battlefield with the authority of an older power, sometimes disguising himself, sometimes stirring courage in warriors whose names would otherwise be lost in dust. It is easy to focus on Zeus in the sky and forget how much the sea god presses from below the horizon of the poem, lending force, resentment, and momentum. The war of men never stays only human. Then comes Odysseus, who learns more sharply than almost anyone what it means to offend Poseidon directly. After Odysseus blinds the Cyclops Polyphemus, he escapes cleverly, but cleverness is not enough. Polyphemus is Poseidon's son, and when a monster calls on his father, the prayer travels. The result is not immediate destruction, but something more haunting: delay. The sea becomes a teacher of helplessness. Winds turn, landfalls fail, home keeps receding. Poseidon's anger in the Odyssey is not just violence. It is prolonged estrangement, the cruelty of a horizon that will not let you arrive. This makes Poseidon one of the great mythic patrons of uncertainty. Zeus may judge, Athena may advise. Poseidon can simply make the path itself unreliable. For sailors and traders, that would have felt terribly real. You could do much right and still be kept from harbor. A prayer to Poseidon was not abstract theology. It was an admission that skill alone does not rule the world. There are quieter details in these myths that listeners sometimes miss. In Athens, the marks of the contest between Athena and Poseidon were shown as sacred traces on the Acropolis. At Troy, the walls themselves could be imagined as bearing divine labor, making the city both human home and monument to divine grievance. In the Odyssey, every unfamiliar shore carries a tremor of his will. Poseidon leaves signs. He likes the world to remember where he has passed. And yet, even his anger serves narrative balance. If Athena stands for strategy, craft, and clear thought, Poseidon stands for the older truth that human plans move across unstable ground. That is why he keeps appearing wherever heroes grow proud of their own design. He reminds them that rout is not mastery, and that a city, however brilliant, still depends on rain, harbor, and the uneasy temper of the world beyond its walls. So his myths with cities and kings are never merely local quarrels. They are lessons told through capes, springs, battlements, and storms. Poseidon contests ownership because the sea itself resists ownership. It touches many lands and belongs finally to none of them. In that sense, every king who bargains near the shore is already standing in Poseidon's territory, whether he knows it or not. For a god so often remembered in anger, Poseidon leaves behind an unexpectedly intimate map of relationships. Not peaceful relationships, not tidy ones, but bonds that spread outward through marriages, seductions, dynasties, monsters, heroes, and cult traditions. To trace them is to see how Greek myth imagined divine power entering bloodlines and coastlines at once. At the center of his household stands Amphitrite. Before she becomes queen beside him, she is one of the sea-born beings associated with the deep. In a gentle and often repeated story, Poseidon desires her, but she withdraws from him and hides. A dolphin finds her and persuades her to return, and in gratitude, Poseidon sets that creature among the stars as Delphinus in later tradition. Whether every Greek teller would have agreed on the astronomy is less important than the feeling of the tale. Even this formidable god is given a courtship story shaped not by conquest alone, but by mediation and persuasion. Their son Triton carries the family's strangeness into later art and literature. He blows the conch shell, announces movement, and seems half herald, half embodiment of surf itself. But Triton is only one among many children attributed to Poseidon. Greek myth gives him an astonishing range of offspring, from noble founders to frightening beings. That abundance is not random. It reflects the old sense that the sea touches countless shores and sends forth many forms of life, some welcome and some terrifying. Fertility and danger remain braided together. In treason, across the Saronic Gulf from Athens, Poseidon is closely tied to the story of Theseus. Aethra sleeps with Aegeus and, in the same carefully ambiguous night of myth, with Poseidon. That double paternity allows the hero to belong both to the human house that raises him and to the wider force that seems to pull him toward risk. For a people living by the sea, it makes sense that a great hero might carry salt in his lineage. Some local rites at treason kept this memory alive, giving Poseidon not just literary presence, but civic ancestry. Myth becomes family history when a city needs noble depth. Another thread runs through the story of Medusa. In later and more familiar retellings, Poseidon lies with her in Athena's temple, and from the blood spilled when Perseus later kills Medusa spring Pegasus and Chrysaor, children linked to Poseidon. The image is unforgettable. From violence and severance come winged wonder and shining lineage. Greek myth is often like that, refusing to sort beauty and pain into separate rooms. Poseidon's presence in the tale reminds you that sea gods do not create only sea children. They create consequences that travel far inland into legend. There's also the older Arcadian cycle with Demeter, one of the strangest and most revealing myth clusters around him. Pursuing the grieving goddess when she tries to hide among mares, Poseidon takes stallion form. From that union come Despoina, a deeply local and mysterious divinity, and in some versions the marvelous horse Arion. To modern ears the tale can feel abrupt or troubling, and ancient worship itself seems to have treated parts of it with secrecy. Yet it preserves something precious, an image of Poseidon far older than polished sculpture, a wild god of horse force, chthonic water, and rural fear. He is oceanic, yes, but also close to the raw countryside. Even monsters tied to him tell part of this story. Polyphemus, the Cyclops of the Odyssey, is his son by the nymph Thosa. The giant is brutish, lonely, pastoral, and immense. He does not resemble a courtly prince of the sea, yet the connection makes sense. Poseidon fathers not only graceful beings like Triton, but also creatures who represent the harsh, lawless edge of his domain. The sea shelters beauty. It also shelters whatever grows large in isolation. Divine family, in Greek myth, is not a portrait gallery. It is an ecosystem. What emerges from all this is not a flattering picture of Poseidon as a gentle father or faithful husband. Greek myth rarely smooths him into moral convenience. Instead, it presents a god whose relationships generate worlds. Cities claim descent from him. Heroes draw stature from him. Creatures of terror or wonder carry his blood. Rituals at coasts and inland sanctuaries alike remember him through lineages that are never entirely safe. That complexity may be one reason he remains so compelling. A distant god can be admired, but a god who appears in your ancestry, your city's founding, your local spring, and your dangerous coastline feels harder to ignore. Poseidon does not simply reign over a domain. He enters houses, wombs, prophecies, and names. He leaves marks in genealogy the way tides leave marks on stone, and long after a single wave is gone, the shaping remains. Poseidon is sometimes reduced in modern memory to a powerful figure with a trident rising from dramatic water. But the Greeks knew him through places and rites as much as through stories. To follow Poseidon properly, you have to move from poem into sanctuary, from sanctuary into civic fear, and from fear into the ordinary knowledge that shorelines can vanish. At the isthmus near Corinth stood one of his great Pan-Hellenic sanctuaries, where the Isthmian Games were held in his honor. There, athletes, nobles, and spectators gathered under the protection of a god who could shake the ground and command the sea routes on either side of that narrow neck of land. The setting is perfect for him. An isthmus is almost an argument between land and water, a place where each presses close to the other. To honor Poseidon, there was to admit that the Greek world was tied together by vulnerable passages. His cult also flourished at Onchestus in Boeotia, famous enough that Homer mentions it, and at Cape Saunion, where a temple looked out over the Aegean like a white thought held against blue distance. Sailors rounding that cape would have seen columns before harbor. That is a profound kind of theology. First the dangerous sea, then the visible sign that someone rules it. At Taenarum, the southern tip of the Peloponnese, Poseidon had another ancient sanctuary near caves and a landscape already haunted by entrances to the underworld. He belongs especially to thresholds. The myths attached to him keep returning to failed offerings and broken promises. King Minos of Crete once prayed for a sign to confirm his right to rule, and Poseidon sent a magnificent bull from the sea. Minos was meant to sacrifice it back to the god. Instead, dazzled by its beauty, he kept it. That act of withholding becomes the seed of disaster. Poseidon, or in some versions the broader machinery of divine punishment, twists the story until Pasiphae's desire, the birth of the Minotaur, and the eventual suffering of Athens all trace back to a king who would not return what had been granted. With Poseidon, gifts are never safely owned if they were meant to be reverently released. Then there is his relation to earthquakes. Unlike a storm, which you can see approaching, an earthquake rises from beneath certainty itself. That made Poseidon terrifying in a very intimate way. The Greeks could imagine waves as his mood. They could also imagine a cracked wall, a fallen temple, or a trembling plain as his passage. In some places, he was invoked precisely because the danger was real. To pray to the earth shaker was to acknowledge that solid ground is in truth, a temporary arrangement. Later Greek memory attached marine catastrophe to him with a moral force. The destruction of Helike in 373 BCE, when earthquake and sea overwhelmed the city, was remembered by many as a sign of Poseidon's power, especially because Helike had been one of his important cult centers. Whether one hears history or sacred interpretation there, the point is the same. Poseidon never ceased to feel contemporary. His myth could leap into real disaster without effort. He also survives in more reflective traditions. In Plato's Critias, Poseidon becomes the divine founder of Atlantis, shaping an island realm with rings of sea and land and fathering its royal line. This is not the same as the old epic myths, and it belongs to a philosophical story rather than inherited cult alone, but it shows how naturally later Greek thoughts still reached for Poseidon when imagining splendor mixed with peril. If a civilization rose from maritime power and then fell through pride, who else would stand at its beginning? The offerings made to him reveal another layer of character. Bulls, horses, libations at the shore, and vows before voyages all suited a god of strength, motion, and dangerous crossing. In some traditions, horses were cast into the sea for him, a ritual as startling as it is memorable, joining his equine and marine identities in a single costly gesture. Greek religion did not flatter the gods with token sentiment. It tried to meet magnitude with magnitude. Poseidon, more than many deities, demanded that worship feel weighty. So when you gather his sanctuaries, his games, his bulls, his quakes, and his remembered catastrophes, a clear portrait emerges. Poseidon is the god of unstable boundaries, between island and mainland, dry ground and shaking ground, gift and debt, kingship and hubris. He is present wherever humans mistake temporary control for permanent mastery. And that may be why his name clung so firmly to capes, harbors, and stories. The world kept proving that he had chosen his symbols well. Poseidon's temples are broken now. His hymns are no longer the public language of law, sacrifice, and festival. Yet the feeling behind him has not vanished. It survives whenever water is beautiful enough to quiet you and powerful enough to unsettle you in the same breath. That is why belief in him, or at least the imaginative need for him, lingers so easily. The modern world measures tides, charts currents, predicts storms, and studies tectonic plates. It explains much that ancient Greeks could only reverence or fear. But explanation does not erase sensation. When a harbor wall shudders under surf, when a ferry moves out from land into open color, when an earthquake reminds a city that stone is not final, the old categories of feeling return with surprising ease. You may not literally expect Poseidon to rise from the water, yet the mind still reaches for a figure large enough to match the experience. He endures because he governs forces that remain fundamentally larger than us. The sea still carries trade, migration, longing, and war. It still hides wrecks and creates routes. It still gives food and takes lives. Poseidon was the Greek way of speaking to that doubleness without pretending it could be solved. He personified not only danger, but relationship with danger. To honor him was to admit dependence on what could never be fully domesticated. There is another reason he remains vivid. His myths are full of contradiction, and contradiction is often what makes a figure feel alive across centuries. He is royal yet unruly, protective yet punishing, splendid yet easily wounded in pride. He fathers heroes and monsters. He creates springs but sends floods. He is associated with horses racing over land and with silent halls far below the sea. Modern characters are often simplified into one defining trait. Poseidon resists that. He has the density of weather, always changing shape while somehow remaining himself. Even artists and storytellers who know only fragments of Greek myth recognize the power of his image. The beard, the trident, the wave, the sea stallions, the rising storm. These symbols are legible almost instantly. But what gives them lasting force is not spectacle alone. It is the old emotional truth underneath them. Humans build ports, seawalls, maps, and engines, and still the horizon suggests something that does not belong to us. Poseidon stands in that gap between skill and surrender. If you imagine the Greek world at rest for a moment, you can feel why he was never forgotten. A fisherman pulls a boat above the tidal line and leaves an offering. A traveler on a headland sees columns at Saunian Pale in the distance. A family inland feels a tremor pass under cups and door frames and murmurs the name of the earth shaker. A poet composing lines for a banquet or a festival remembers that no voyage, however heroic, is made on courage alone. Across all these scenes, Poseidon is less a character entering from outside than a pattern already present in life. And so his gentle resolution is not that he becomes harmless. Greek myth rarely asks the world to soften beyond recognition. The resolution is that humans learn to live beside greatness without denying its danger. They build shrines on capes, tell stories of divine anger, and praise the beauty of horses and breakers in the same breath. In that way, myth becomes a practice of balance. It teaches reverence where control fails. Now, as the story settles, Poseidon seems less like a wrathful interruption and more like the deep rhythm beneath many older fears and hopes. He is the pulse under the hull, the hidden spring under stone, the shiver in the earth, the long shining road between islands. He is what the Greeks named when they looked at the world and recognized that some powers must be approached, not possessed. So you can leave him there, if you like, in his golden halls below the moving surface, where dolphins curve through dim green light and the god of the restless sea holds his trident without haste. Above him, ships continue their crossings. Cities continue their building. People continue to watch the water and feel, however briefly, both wonder and respect. That feeling is his oldest temple. And as long as the horizon keeps its distance, Poseidon will remain, somewhere in human imagination, the ruler of what glitters, nourishes, trembles, and cannot be told to stay still. And that's where this story comes to a rest. Close your eyes, carry this story with you, and slowly drift off to sleep. If you enjoyed it, subscribe to Close Your Eyes, Listen to Stories. There's always a new story waiting for you here. Sweet dreams.